everybody. I know it's been a little while. I was off on vacation, but I'm back now. So here we go with chapter 24, Morel and Son. Anyone who had left Marseille a few years back, knowing the interior workings of the firm of Morel and Son, had returned at this period, would have noted a great change. Instead of the animation, comfort, and happiness that seemed to radiate from the prosperous house, instead of the merry faces seen from behind the window curtains, of the busy clerks hurrying to and fro with their pens behind their ears, instead of the yard filled with bales of good and echoing with the shouts and laughter of the porters, he would at once have perceived a certain sadness and gloomy listlessness. The corridor was deserted and the yard empty. Of the numerous employees who formerly filled the office, 2 only remained. The one, a young man of 23 or 24, named Emmanuel, who was in love with Morel's daughter and had stayed with the firm in spite of his relatives' efforts to get him to resign. The other, an old, one-eyed cashier called Coquelet, a nickname which had been given him by the young people who used to throng this buzzing hive, now almost uninhabited, and which had so completely taken the place of his real name that in all probability he would not now have answered to the latter. Coquelet had remained within M. Morel's service, and a singular change had been effected in his position. He had been raised to the rank of cashier, and at the same time lowered to that of servant. Nevertheless, it was the same good, patient Coquelet, inflexible where arithmetic was concerned, the only point on which he would stand his ground against the whole world, if need be, even against M. Morel himself. Nothing had yet occurred to shake Coquelet's belief in the firm. Last month's payments had been effected with rigorous punctuality. Coquelet had detected an error of 70 cents made by M. Morel to his own disadvantage, and the same day he had brought the money to his chief, who took it and, with a sad smile, dropped it into the almost empty drawer, saying, "Thanks, Coquelet. You are a pearl among cashiers." No man could have been happier than Coquelet was at hearing his master speak thus, for praise from M. Morel, the pearl of all honest men of Marseille, counted more with Coquelet than a gift of 50 crowns. M. Morel had spent many a cruel hour since the end of the month. To enable him to meet his liabilities, he had been obliged to gather in all his resources, and, fearing lest a rumor of his difficulty should spread about the town of Marseille when it was known that he had had recourse to such extremities, he had himself gone to the friar at Beaucaire to sell some of his wife's and daughter's jewelry and some of his silverware. By means of this sacrifice, the honor of the firm had been preserved, but funds were now exhausted. Following the reports that had been noised abroad, credit was no longer to be had, and M. Morel's only hope of meeting the payment of 100,000 francs due to M. Beauville on the 15th of that month, and the 100,000 due on the 15th of the following month, lay in the return of the Pharaon. He had had news of her departure from another ship that had weighed anchor at the same time and had arrived safely in port. This was more than a fortnight ago, and yet there was still no further news of the Pharaon. Such was the state of affairs that when the representative of Thomson and French of Rome called on M. Morel, Emmanuel received him. Every fresh face was a new cause of alarm to the young man, for it suggested yet one more anxious creditor come to question the head of the firm, and he was ever desirous of sparing his employer an embarrassing interview. He now questioned the newcomer, but the stranger would have nothing to do with M. Emmanuel and wished to see M. Morel in person. Emmanuel rose with a sigh, and summoning Coquelet, bade him conduct the stranger to M. Morel. Coquelet walked in front, and the stranger followed. On the staircase, they met a pretty girl of 16 or 17, who looked at the stranger with an uneasy expression. "Is M. Morel in his office, Mademoiselle Julie?" asked the cashier. "Yes, at least I think so," answered the girl hesitantly. "Go first and see whether my father is there, Coquelet, and announce the gentleman." "It would be useless to announce me, mademoiselle," replied the Englishman. "M. Morel does not know my name. All that this good man can say is that I am the head clerk of Messrs. Thomson and French of Rome, with whom your father has business connections." The girl turned pale and passed downstairs, while Coquelet and the Englishman went up. On seeing the stranger enter his office, M. Morel closed the ledger he had before him, rose, and offered him a chair. 14 years had worked a great change in the worthy merchant, who, but 36 at the beginning of this story, was now nearing 50. His hair had turned white, anxiety and worry had plowed deep furrows on his brow, and the look in his eyes, once so firm and staunch, had now become vague and irresolute. The Englishman looked at him with a feeling of curiosity mingled with interest. "You wish to speak with me, monsieur," said Morel, becoming embarrassed under the stranger's steady gaze. "Yes, monsieur. Messrs. Thompson and French of Rome have to pay 300,000 or 400,000 francs in France during the course of the present month and the next, and knowing your strict promptitude in regard to payments, they have collected all the bills bearing your signature, and have charged me to collect the money from you as it falls due, and to make the appropriate use of the money." Monsieur Morel heaved a deep sigh and passed his hand over his sweat-bedewed forehead. "You hold bills signed by me, monsieur?" asked Morel. "Yes, monsieur, for a considerable sum, but first of all," he continued, taking a bundle of papers from his pocket, "I have here an assignment for 200,000 francs made over to our firm by Monsieur de Beauville, the inspector of prisons. Do you acknowledge this debt?" "Yes, monsieur. He invested the money with me at 4.5% nearly 5 years ago, half of it being redeemable on the 15th of the present month, and the other half on the 15th of the coming month." "Just so. Then I have here 32,500 francs payable at the end of the month. These are the bills signed by you and assigned to our firm by the holders." "I recognize them," said Morel, whose face became red with shame at the thought that for the first time in his life he would in all probability not be able to honor his signature. "Is that all?" "No, monsieur. I have these bills for the end of the month assigned to us by Pascal and Wild and Turner of Marseille, about 55,000 francs in all, making a total of 287,500 francs. What Monsieur Morel suffered during this enumeration is impossible to describe. 287,500 francs, he replied automatically. "Yes, monsieur," replied the Englishman, "but," he continued after a moment's silence, "I will not conceal from you, Monsieur Morel, that though I am fully aware of your blameless probity up to the present, public report is rife in Marseille that you are not in a position to meet your obligations." At this almost brutal frankness, Morel turned pale. "Up to the present, monsieur," said he, "and it is more than 24 years since I took over the directorship of the firm from my father, who had himself managed it for 35 years. Until now, not one bill signed by Morel and Son has ever been presented for payment that has not been duly honored." "I am fully aware of that," replied the Englishman, "but as one man of honor to another, tell me quite frankly, shall you pay these with the same exactitude?" Morel stared and looked at this man who spoke to him with more assurance than he had hitherto shown. "To questions put with such frankness," said he, "a straightforward answer must be given. Yes, monsieur, I shall pay if, as I hope, my ship arrives safely, for its arrival will restore to me the credit of which one stroke of ill fortune after another has deprived me of. But should, by some ill chance, this my last resource, the Pharaon, fail me, I fear, monsieur, I shall be compelled to suspend payment." "The Pharaon is your last hope, then?" "Absolutely the last. And," he continued, "her delay is not natural. She left Calcutta on February the 5th and should have been here more than a month ago." "What is that?" exclaimed the Englishman, listening intently. "What is the meaning of this noise?" "Oh, heavens!" cried Morel, turning ghastly color. "What fresh disaster is this?" In truth, there was much noise on the staircase. People were running hither and thither, and now and then a cry of distress was heard. Morel rose to open the door, but his strength failed him, and he sank back into his chair. The two men sat facing each other. Morel was trembling in every limb, while the stranger was looking at him with an expression of profound pity. The noise ceased, but nevertheless it was apparent that Morel was simply awaiting events. The hubbub was not without reason, and would naturally have its sequel. The stranger thought he heard several people come up the stairs quietly and stop on the landing. A key was inserted in the lock of the first door, which creaked on its hinges. Julie entered, her cheeks bathed with tears. Supporting himself on the arm of his chair, Morel rose unsteadily. He wanted to speak, but his voice failed him. "Oh, father, father," exclaimed the girl, clasping her hands. "Forgive your daughter for being the bearer of bad news. Father, be brave." Morel turned deathly pale. "So the Pharaon is lost?" he asked in a choked voice. The girl made no answer, but she nodded her head and fell into his arms. "And the crew?" "Saved," said the young girl. "Saved by the Bordeaux vessel that has just entered the port." "Thank God," said he. "At least thou strikest me alone." Scarcely had he uttered these words when Madame Morel came in sobbing, followed by Emmanuel. Standing in the background were to be seen the stalwart forms of 7 or 8 half-naked sailors. The Englishman started at the sight of these men. He took a step toward them, but then restrained himself and withdrew to the furthest and darkest corner of the room. Madame Morel seated herself in a chair and took her husband's hand in hers, whilst Julie still lay with her head on her father's shoulder. Emmanuel remained in the middle of the room like a link between the Morel family and the sailors at the door. "How did it happen?" asked Morel. "Draw nearer, Penelon," said the young man, "and relate all that happened." An old sailor, bronzed by tropical suns, advanced, twirling the remains of a hat in his hand. "Good day, my friend," said the shipowner, unable to refrain from smiling through his tears. "What has become of your captain?" "The captain, monsieur, has stayed behind sick at Palma, but there is nothing serious the matter, and, God willing, you will see him here in a few days as well as you or I." "I am glad of that. Now, Penelon, say what you have to say." Penelon rolled his quid of tobacco from his left to his right cheek, put his hand before his mouth, turned round, and shot a long jet of dark saliva into the antechamber. Then he drew nearer and, with arms akimbo, said, "Well, then, Monsieur Morel, we were somewhere between Cape Blanc and Cape Boyador, sailing along with a good south-southwesterly breeze after dawdling along under 8 days' calm, when Captain Gumar comes up to me, I must explain that I was at the helm, and says, 'Daddy Penelon, what do you make of those clouds rising on the horizon?' I was just looking at them myself. 'What do I make of them, Captain? I think they are rising faster than they have any business to do, and they are too black for clouds that mean no mischief.' 'I think so too,' says the captain, 'and I am going to be prepared. We have too much canvas for the gale we shall have in a very short time.' 'A gale,' says I. 'He who bets that what we are going to have is a gale will get more than he bargained for. We are in for a downright good hurricane, or I know nothing about it. You can see the wind coming just as you can see the dust at Monte. Luckily, I had someone to deal with it who had met it before. All hands taken 2 reefs in the topsails,' bawls the captain. Let go the bowlines, brace to, lower the topgallant sails, haul out the reef tackles on the yards. Well, after being tossed about for 12 hours, we sprung a leak. 'Penelon,' says the captain to me, 'I believe we are sinking. Give me the helm and go down to the hold.' I gave him the helm and went down. We had already shipped 3 feet of water. I come up again crying, 'To the pumps,' but it was too late. We all set to work, but the faster we pumped, the more water she seemed to take. 'Well, since we are sinking,' says I, 'let us sink. One can die but once.' 'Is that the example you set, Master Penelon?' says the captain. 'Just wait a bit.' He went to his cabin and fetched a brace of pistols. 'I will blow the brains out of the first man who leaves the pumps,' he bellows out. 'There is nothing like common sense to put courage into a man,' continued the sailor, 'especially as by that tune the wind had abated and the sea had gone down. Still the water continued to rise. Not much, it is true, about 2 inches an hour. Nevertheless, it rose. 2 inches an hour does not seem much, but in 12 hours that is no less than 24 inches. And 24 inches are 2 feet. 2 feet added to the 3 we had before made 5. When a ship has got 5 feet of water inside her, she is as much a good as a man with the dropsy. 'Come along now,' says the captain. 'We have had enough of this. We have done what we could to save the ship, now we must try to save ourselves. To the boats, boys, quick as you can.' 'You see, Monsieur Morel,' continued Penelon, 'we love the Pharaon well enough, but much as a sailor may love his ship, he loves his life more. We required no second telling, especially as the boat seemed to moan and call out to us, 'Get along, save your lives.' And the poor Pharaon told no lie. We literally felt her sink under our feet. We had the boat out on a trice with 8 of us in it. The captain was the last to leave the ship, or rather he would not leave her. So I takes hold of him and throws him down to my comrades, and then I jumps down after him. We were only just in time, for I had no sooner jumped into the boat than the deck burst with a noise like the broadside of a man of war. 10 minutes later she pitched forward, then she pitched the other way, and finally began to spin round like a dog after its tail. Then it was goodbye to the Pharaon. As for us, we were 3 days without food or drink. We had already spoken about drawing lots to which of us should serve as food for the others when we sighted the Grillon. We made signals to her, she sighted us, made toward us, put out her boat, and took us on board. There now, Monsieur Morel, that is exactly how it all happened, on my word of honor as a sailor. Speak up, you others, and say whether it is the truth." A general murmur of assent indicated that the narrator had their votes as to the verity of the subject and the picturesqueness of the details. Well done, my friends, said Monsieur Morel. You are good fellows. I felt sure I had nothing to blame for what has happened but my own bad luck. It is God's will and not man's doing. Let us submit to the will of God. Now what praise due to you? Oh, don't let us speak of that, Monsieur Morel. On the contrary, we must, said the shipowner with a sad smile. Well then, there is 3 months' pay due to us. Coquelet, pay each of these good men 200 francs. At another time, continued Monsieur Morel, I should have give each one an extra 200. But times are hard, my friend, and the little bit of money I have left does not belong to me. Excuse me, therefore, and don't think any of the worse of me for that. Penelon was visibly and deeply moved, and turning toward his comrades, exchanged a few words with them. As far as that goes, Monsieur Morel, said he, rolling his quid to the other side of his mouth and shooting a second jet of saliva into the antechamber. As far as that goes, my shipmates and I say that for the time being 50 francs is quite enough for us, and that we will wait for the rest. Thank you, my friends, thank you, Monsieur Morel exclaimed, deeply touched. You are dear good fellows. Take the money, though, and if you find another employer, enter his service. You are free to do so. I have no more ships, and therefore no further use for sailors. You have no more ships, said Penelon. Well, then we will build you some, and we will wait. A spell of a short commons won't hurt us, thank heaven. I have no money to build other ships, Penelon, said the shipowner with a sad smile, so I cannot accept your offer, much as I appreciate it. If you have no money, you surely shall not pay us. Like the Pharaon, we can go under bare poles. Enough, my friends, said Morel, choking with emotion. Leave me, I beg you. We will see each other again at a happier time. Emmanuel, he continued, accompany them and see to it that my wishes are carried out. He made a sign to Coquelet, who went out in front, followed by the sailors and finally by Emmanuel. Now, said the shipowner to his wife and daughter, leave me a while. I wish to speak with this gentleman. The two ladies looked at the stranger, whom they had entirely forgotten, and withdrew. When going out, however, the girl cast an entreating look on the Englishman, to which he responded with a smile, such as one would hardly expect to see on those stern features. The two men were left alone. Well, monsieur, said Morel, sinking into his chair, you have seen and heard all. I have nothing further to tell you. Yes, monsieur. I have learnt that you are the victim of fresh misfortune, and as unmerited as the rest. This has only confirmed my desire to render you a service. I am one of your principal creditors, am I not? In any case, you are in possession of the bills that will fall due first. Would you like the date of payment prolonged? It would certainly save my honor and consequently my life. How long do you ask? Morel hesitated a moment, and then he said, 3 months. But do you think, Mrs. Thomas and French, do not worry about that. I will take all responsibility upon myself. Today is the 5th of June. Renew these bills up to the 5th of September, and at 11 o'clock, at that moment the clock struck 11. On the 5th of September I shall present myself. I shall await you, monsieur, said Morel, and you will be paid or else I shall be dead. These last words were said in such a low voice that the stranger did not hear them. The bills were renewed and the old ones destroyed, so that the unfortunate shipowner was given another 3 months in which to gather together his last resources. The Englishman received his thanks with the coldness peculiar to his race, and bade farewell to Morel, who, calling down blessings on him, accompanied him to the door. On the stairs he met Julie. She pretended to be going down, but in reality she was waiting for him. Oh, monsieur, she exclaimed, clasping her hands. Mademoiselle, said the stranger, one day you will receive a letter signed Sinbad the Sailor. Do exactly what the letter bids you to do, no matter how extraordinary the instructions may appear. Will you promise me to do this? I promise. Very well, then. Very good, then. Farewell, mademoiselle. Always remain as good and virtuous as you are now, and I am sure God will reward you by giving you Emmanuel as your husband. Julie uttered a faint exclamation and blushed like a rose, while the stranger nodded farewell and went on his way. In the yard he met Penelon, who had a roll of 100 francs in each hand, and seemed as though he could not make up his mind to keep them. Come along with me, my friend, the Englishman said to him. I should like to have a word with you. And that is the end of chapter 24. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you later.